Good morning. We have a few extra books. If somebody needs one, or if you've been sharing and you don't want to share anymore, you can get an extra one. So last week nobody said they needed one, but I think some were sharing. I don't know any Sharons here, but hopefully you understand my accent by now. If you can understand Tabby, you should be able to understand me, because everybody says she sounds like way more of a hick than I do. So, proud hick. Yep. This morning's lesson is lesson 5 of our study of the Godhead. It begins, I believe, on page 42. Or that ought to get you pretty close anyway, if my little note here is wrong. It is the last lesson on technically the first person of the Godhead. These first 5 lessons have been more or less limited to Him. The next few lessons will be about the second person of the Godhead, we call Jesus, and then the last few lessons will be on the third person of the Godhead, the Holy Spirit. And like I said, this is the last one about the Father, usually we call Him. But some of these things in these first few lessons have really applied to the whole Godhead. The study is technically about the Godhead, but they've just divided it up in that kind of way, divided by the persons of the Godhead. But everything that can be said about one person of the Godhead, as far as their attributes, could be said of the others as well. Maybe not exactly their role and specifics of the part that they've played over the course of history, but there's no distinctive attributes. They're distinct persons, but they're attributes. It's not like, well, the Father is the real hard, tough one, the wrathful one, and then the Son is the soft, gentle, gracious, tender one, and then the Spirit is sort of the one that nobody knows anything about. No, what is said about one, as far as their character attributes, is true of all. So I say that to say that whenever we look at the gracious one regarding the Father, or the first person of the Godhead, is not to say that Jesus isn't gracious, and the same with holiness. Just because God is the Holy One, Jesus is holy, the Spirit is holy. But that's our lesson for this morning, is looking at God as holy. The term holy is used in the Bible. Really, the word means set apart. That's the meaning of the word, something that has been set apart, especially when it comes to man or something earthly or physical. To say that it's holy is to say that it is separate in some way. It's set apart. When it's applied to God, the word seems to, it still means that, but it seems to take on another meaning of perfection, character-wise. He is utterly, infinitely righteous and right and good. And it's used in both ways in Leviticus 11, verse 44, where Moses records God saying, "For I am Jehovah your God. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am holy." And then he goes on to say, don't defile yourselves with certain things according to the law. God's holiness is the standard, sets the standard at least, or is at least the precedent for man's holiness. Be separate, be set apart. And the way, this is why the definition and the meaning can get, and our understanding can get a little confusing, because the way to be set apart spiritually is to do right. The world lives like the world, lives for themselves, unto themselves, and the way to be separate or set apart from the world is to not do that. So to be holy means to be set apart, but to be set apart, you must live a righteous life, and therefore sometimes holy is just taken to simply mean you live you're a righteous person. But I would argue that that's not, strictly speaking, what the word means in terms of man being holy, but to be separate, to be set apart, technically is what it means. So, because God is light, and John said there in Him is no darkness at all, His followers have to live holy lives according to or avoiding sin. Don't do things that are sinful. Avoid sinful behaviors of all kinds, because God doesn't stand for those things. He's holy. We're going to see in Habakkuk in a minute that He can't tolerate evil. So if He can't look upon evil favorably, then I don't need to have evil in my life, because then He won't be able to look on me favorably, because He can't tolerate it. He can't behold evil. 2 Peter 1:14. And again, in that case, we don't really know what's going on there. As far as, again, it's a vision, so it's not supposed to be indicative of something that's actually going on in heaven right this minute. I mean, it could be, but that's not the point of John's vision in Revelation, is to show us literally what's happening in heaven, at any given moment. But that's the way that it is depicted in that vision as a message. He's holy. And what those elders and living creatures were doing is what we ought to be doing. Every waking moment of our lives is declaring. We don't have to, sit, bow down, all day long and say those words over and over and over. But our lives should say those words constantly. Those sentiments should be exhibited in the way we live, would be the idea. And it's similar here. Well, then one of the seraphim called to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is Jehovah of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory. Holy, holy, holy." That's the song we just sang. This is the source of that. Holy, holy, holy. 3 times. Purposefully. 3 times. It's emphatic, especially in Hebrew literature or writing. 3 times. Holy, holy, holy. Yes, sir. Yeah. It fits, 3 of them. Holy, holy, holy. But even though Isaiah is having this vision, and it's a vision of the temple, by the way, if you notice in verse 1, He's high and lifted up, and the train of His robe filled the temple. So the vision is in the temple. We don't know if Isaiah was in the temple or if he was just seeing the temple, but even though the vision was of Him in the temple, His glory fills the whole earth, the entire earth. The train of His robe in the vision was filling the temple, but His glory His glory fills the whole earth. That's how glorious and holy He is. And whenever that statement was made in verse 3, it says the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of the seraph, and the house was filled with smoke. But it's how Isaiah responded. His holiness is beyond comprehension. And when Isaiah saw this vision with Jehovah Himself, with the smoke filling the room, the train of His robe filling the temple, the seraphim, and the declaration, it says, he says, "And I said, woe is me, for I am lost. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, Jehovah of hosts. That was Isaiah's reaction. He saw this vision. And his reaction was, woe is me. W-O-E. What is that anyway? It's not what you tell your horse when you're ready to stop. Woe is me. What's woe? Okay. It's an expression of distress. You're in the way he's using it. Woe is me. But think about like when Jesus said, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. And woe, it's a term of it's a negative term, obviously. Shame or judgment, devastation. And this is how he felt about himself in response to seeing this vision of God in His holiness and in His glory. And the rest of what he says sort of explains it or answers the question about what does woe is me mean. I'm lost. I'm a man of unclean lips. I'm not worthy to be seeing this, is his point. I'm unworthy. And there was also that little thing about, no man has seen God and lived. He's saying, my eyes have seen the King, Jehovah of hosts, and I shouldn't be seeing it because I am not worthy. Yeah, Dean?
I think this might say too, this is where Isaiah himself was humbling himself.
Mm-hmm.
Because he said, woe is me. And like you said, he didn't think he was worthy to be seeing this vision, but he did. And I think the reason why he saw this vision, God had already chosen him as a prophet before the people. So that was the reason why God revealed it to him, to show to him, how powerful God is.
Yeah. Well, it got the point across, it seems, because that's what Isaiah knew. I'm not worthy of seeing this. Well, in the rest of the vision, or that part of it anyway, one of the seraphim flew over to him and was holding a burning coal that he took off the altar, and he touched Isaiah's mouth with it. Ouch. But, again, just a vision. His point was, your guilt is taken away. Your sin has been atoned for. And Isaiah's ultimate response was, here I am, God, send me. Send me wherever you want to send me. And that should be our response too. In response to God, I know I'm not worthy. Just like Paul, how many times did Paul communicate this kind of idea about himself? The grace that's been given to me by God to be His servant. I'm thankful to God that He has allowed me to be His apostle to the Gentiles. Because he felt within himself he was not worthy to be chosen by God to be anything, even saved, much less to be able to dedicate the rest of his life to serving Him on earth. That should be our response too. Finally, in Habakkuk chapter 2, the prophet Habakkuk. Very interesting book among the very neglected minor prophets. Arguably the most neglected section of books in the whole Bible, probably, is the minor prophets. I think a lot of people get the idea that, well, there's not really any reason to study the minor prophets because it's not any different than the major prophets. Well, that's not true, for one thing. But even so, there's something there to learn. But the minor prophets are totally distinct, not only from one another, but from the major prophets. Just like, that'd be like saying, well, there's no reason to read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, or Mark, Luke, and John because I already read Matthew. No, you'll miss a whole lot if you do that. Well, the minor prophets are worthy of reading and study, and Habakkuk is up there with one of the most intriguing of them. And it begins with Habakkuk complaining to God. One of God's prophets is complaining to him. Well, that already sort of makes it unique, because that doesn't sound like something that happened very often. But he's complaining to God because of what he's seeing in his own real life, what he sees around him. There's all kinds of evil going on, and nobody's doing anything about it. Now, can you relate to Habakkuk? Surely, based on that alone, Habakkuk is a pretty relatable book for us today. Why is there the people who are seemingly wicked just go on being wicked and prosper, and nothing ever happens to them? And remember, he's directing it to God and saying, God, why aren't you doing anything? Why are you letting this? Now, he's talking about the evil among his own people. Not, why is everybody picking on Judah and you're letting them, God? No, he's talking about in Judah, I see all kinds of rampant wickedness. Why are you letting this happen? That's how the book is set up. In verse 13 of chapter 1, he says, you who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? Now, those are fighting words. Sounds like. That's a direct challenge. But notice what he declared in the midst of that. Even though it's in the middle of a question, he declares that God is of purer eyes than to behold evil, and that he cannot look at wrong. In other words, he can't tolerate it. Well, rather than explaining himself to Habakkuk, he does a little bit. He answers him, but he doesn't get into a big explanation. He actually, immediately, he says, Habakkuk, I am doing something about it, just because you don't realize it. I've got it under control, Habakkuk. But further than that, he challenges Habakkuk in really Habakkuk's way of thinking. So many times, much of our misunderstanding and misgivings about things, especially spiritual things and godly things about God, is because of the flaw is not in whatever we're judging, but the flaw is in our way of thinking. You're not thinking right. And it has skewed everything that you think about it, because you're thinking of it in the wrong way. So God, in chapter 2, verse 4, he says, behold, his soul is puffed up. It's not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by his faith. That's a direct challenge to Habakkuk, I would say, and anybody who is thinking like Habakkuk. But then God pronounces woes. Here we go with woes again. Woes upon the wicked. Woe to the Chaldeans. Woe to him who heaps up what is not his own. Woe to him who gets evil gain for his house. Woe to him who builds a town with blood and iniquity. Woe to him who makes his neighbors drink and make them drunk. Woe to him who says to a wooden thing, awake, to a silent stone, arise. Can this teach? What an interesting question to put in there. Of all the things that could have made the same statement, is this real? Can this breathe? Can this move? Can this speak? But he says, can this teach? This wooden thing that you made. He's talking about idols. Verse 18, he says, what profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it, a metal image, a teacher of lies? For its maker trusts in his own creation when he makes speechless idols. Woe to him who says to a wooden thing, awake, to a silent stone, arise. Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in it. But Jehovah is in his holy temple. let all the earth keep silence before Him. So what did we see? We saw at first Psalm 99, God's holiness should result in man's worship. In Isaiah 6, God's holiness should result in man's service. And here, Habakkuk 2, God's holiness is infinitely emphasized over something that man has created. Whether it's a physical thing man has created or a not physical thing man has created. An idea maybe. Back then, there were still ideas, but unlike today, the only things that were really created were actual concrete physical things. Today we live in a world where the things that man creates are not necessarily tangible concrete things. Digital things. Lots of things can be an idol. But at the end of the day, the creations of man are nothing. But God is. And He is not only something that does have breath in Him as far as that expression goes. He is in His holy temple, ultimately, infinitely holy. And it should result in our keeping silence before Him. What does it mean to keep silence before Him? God doesn't want you to talk to Him? There's your response to praying. We shouldn't pray because we ought to keep silence before God. Is that what He means? If we pray to God, is God in the end on Judgment Day going to say, why did you pray to me so much? Did you not read Habakkuk 2:20 when I said, be silent before me? Okay. Respect, trust. Yeah, it could be even a trusting thing. Respect thing. Not challenging. Like pretty much doing the opposite of what Habakkuk did. That's a direct rebuke, sort of maybe indirect rebuke to Habakkuk. Keep silent. I know what I'm doing. Yeah. Yeah. In spite of all He had given them and done for them. Well, those who appreciate the forgiveness that's found in Jesus must be ready to share God's message. That's our second application. We already looked at the first one, more or less. Just like Isaiah, here I am, Lord, send me. And ultimately, one of our goals should be sharing God's message. So if we appreciate God's forgiveness that's found in Jesus, then we ought to be trying to share that forgiveness with other people, which means sharing the gospel with other people. God doesn't just want me to be saved. He wants everybody I know to be saved. And so if I appreciate the fact that I'm able to be saved, I need to share that saving message with others in my life.